Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 1371. Return to the Guardian Tree. The group returned to the Guardian Tree, leaving the world of Twilight behind. Passing through the Hell Gate, they immediately ported back down to Minazmar, where they were greeted by the second rescue team Lena had set up in the meantime. "You idiot! How could you just run off on your own?" the girls pelted him with words, while pressing the air out of him with their tight hugs. He didn't comment that he was, in fact, not alone, having the group of Golem Knights, Tatzel, Heads, and Hellion with him. The blacksmith simply accepted their hugs and criticism with a smile. After a happy reunion and the revelation that everyone was alive, they all gave a rough report on what happened on the other side, before they all returned to their rooms to calm down and recover. Once the danger was over, the whole matter quickly wrapped up. The next day, Karina was given the fruits Love was able to bring with her, while the Dryad sealed the Hell Gate with the power of the Guardian Tree. It was not properly closed, but was now completely swallowed by the tree on the other side, hiding it from privy eyes. Now, the only world past the Hell Gate they still kept contact with was the cave world, where Monique and Jane were still traveling on a diplomatic mission. Going further than just procuring food, they were even in the talks to have some people like Jonia Taggart go and study their tech. Fortunately, nothing else dramatic was currently happening that needed Seth's attention, giving the blacksmith the chance to return to his original work. A project that had waited for him since before Spacia openly attacked. The Sky Dragon armor. They had finished the design during the meeting of masters, encompassing not just the set of 12 plate pieces. It came together with a set of adamantine mail and a gambeson for padding and protection made by Nico Booz. It was the full set of protection. All that was left was adapting the various enchantments to the individual recipient. As for who they were, there were two confirmed recipients of the complete Sky Dragon armor, Monique and Fainus. The chosen of Athena and Phobos, respectively, were chosen because of their specific mix of magical and physical combat skills. For the start there were only these two. There were two reasons for that. The first was that they only had 20 heart scales, actually 19.5, because he had already used half of a scale. When he proceeded like with Bart's gauntlets, Seth estimated that he would need roughly 7 full scales for one armor set. Even with the blacksmith started pinching on the material, there was not enough material for a full third one. The second was that it would have been unfair to use everything on a select few. Nobody would argue against either of the two deserving the armor, but there were quite a few members eligible for dragon armor. However, many who may have been eligible already had legendary armor pieces. It was more practical to make individual items with the remaining 5.5 scales that would be left after making the armor sets. Maybe a third armor would have been possible if he had had enough points to upgrade one of the armor scales, but he didn't. At this point, he was gaining between 3,000 to 5,000 points of power of existence a day and was nearing the 150,000, yet that was not enough to upgrade a scale. He had tried. Since he didn't have enough, he only got the message that it wasn't enough, not how much it would take in the end. With that question out of the way, they had decided to make sets for the two that could put them to the best use. Monique was currently off-world, but Fainus was still on vacation in Delta, so he had invited the chosen of Phobos to come by and talk a little more about her preferences in her armor. Although Seth and Mina had gotten intimate with Fainus at one point, the blacksmith didn't know her power in depth. Especially not since she had become a chosen. It was already a little later when he got to the workshop, but he still had a couple of hours before Fainus was supposed to come by. So he inspected Cerberus' work in the meantime. While Seth had been spending the past weeks with adventures and legendary items, the massive golem had been tirelessly churning out epic-rated swords. Thanks to the perfectly balanced shape and Cerberus' impeccable craftsmanship, he was able to create an epic weapon from the rare-rated dark steel they mined at several locations in Minazmar. Even though they were at the very lowest end of what an epic-rated weapon could do, that was all that mattered. After all, these were not meant for their own people. This became apparent with the next treatment Seth was going to give them. Sitting down at his etching table, the bard placed demonic runes on the blank swords without prior enchantment. Seth etched the Berserker of Aureas onto the blades of the black weapons. This was the same ballad he had used for the Mind Render blade, although it was a little weaker in this form. But that wasn't a problem, as the last step was what would make the sword a finished product. When placing souls in the soul refinery, the crafting station allowed him to extract the preferred powers and skills he wanted out of one or a mass of souls. In that case, what happened to the parts he didn't want or need? Just like when doing it by hand, he had two options with the refinery. Either the unneeded parts of the soul, like memories, skills, and wills not connected to his target, would either be discarded, or he had the option to concentrate them into a very small part of the soul and extract that. Seth had done so for a while, collecting a sizable amount of chaotic souls that slowly collected dust in his soul space. Why had he done so? Because he had experienced phenomenal success with such a soul in the past. The whimsical curse, maybe Seth's favorite necklace he had ever made, was created from humble materials and imbued with the souls of several giant monkeys, amateurishly fused together. If this coincidental success of making a cursed accessory taught him one thing, then it was that nothing was without use. Now the extracted, chaotic mind formed thousands of souls, condensed into small and medium souls, finally had their time to shine, in the blacksmith's mass production of cursed weapons. The attentive reader may ask why he was doing so. Seth had thought of this some time ago, when he was coming up with ways to raise his power of existence. His ultimate goal was selling legendary items through the auction house and raising his reputation across the system worlds. But he couldn't do that for now. Instead, he thought of farming some on the voracious cloud continent. As expected, with the soul armament imbued into the epic blade, they ranked up to relics. Relics with a very low chance of becoming a legend, but a chance. With these, he could farm power and strike their enemies at the same time. Seth intended to send these to Marco on the cloud continent, before they started their offensive. The wielder of the ice rapier would then make sure that these swords would find their way into the hands of the remaining sect alliance. Even a simple standard sword forged by Cerberus was above most he had seen come from the cloud continent, so they would jump at the chance to get a good sword. Especially with the power up the demon berserker power promised. Once they started using it, the chaotic soul and the mind corruption would erode their minds, disrupting and weakening the sects from inside, as their best fighters slowly went insane. What gained a reputation even quicker than a good weapon? A cursed one. The more people greedily and stupidly would strive to use the powerful sword, confident that they could overcome its drawbacks, the easier it would be for him to farm power of existence and the higher would be the chance for the swords to become legends in the end. It was a great plan to recycle materials and maybe get some medium to great gains out of it. Chapter 1372 Knock knock knock. Knock knock knock. Seth just started etching the sixth sword when there were knocks on the door of the workshop. Pausing his work, he found Sivri already opening the door. Standing outside was a heavily breathing Fainus, covered in sweat. She finally arrived at the workshop. I am sorry for being late. I was training to calm down and somehow forgot the time. I came the moment I saw the clock, she apologized, embarrassed. Judging by the fact that her hair was still drenched, she barely remembered to change her clothes. It's fine. Sit over there, I will finish this and then we can talk, the blacksmith answered, not pausing his work. Since the chosen of Phobos was late, it was her turn to wait until he was done. 10 minutes later, he placed the edged sword to the side and turned to Fainus. All right, let's talk. Seth had a rough idea of Fainus' powers, but as someone who only saw them once or twice from the side, that wasn't a lot originally. Fainus was a mountain brigand, so some kind of bandit class focused on physical combat. However, since she had become the chosen of Phobos, she had gained something akin to illusion skills. Can you describe your current skills and combat style to me? The blacksmith asked her to give him a quick description. It may have been rude to ask a customer to reveal their secrets and explain their powers, but they were close enough at this point not to worry about that. Well, I already had a number of intimidation and acting skills from my role as bandit leader, but it kind of escalated with the sword you gave me. Afterward, I became the God of Fear's champion, so, she began and continued to list a sizable number of skills corresponding to mental status effects. Apart from using intimidation and fear, she had skills to cause frightening illusions, skills that caused fear paralysis, or raised the chance of it and related status effects, like confusion. But these were actually just support skills, as the main bulk of Fainus skills were based on dealing more damage to affected targets and simply becoming stronger by frightening enemies. My ultimate skill actually allows me to choose to transform into a target's greatest fear and gain the corresponding strength, if that fear is stronger than myself. Although that has a time limit, she explained. Apart from these magic-based skills, her foundation was a physical warrior using the Yatagan Mem, which she also relied on heavily to make use of her skills. Seth was not surprised. As a product probably touched by shock, the demon of malicious humor, Yatagan Mem was one of his more abstract items. I think I get the idea. So, what are you expecting of the armor? The blacksmith asked. When Seth found that he had a rough understanding of what she could benefit from, their talk changed to the things she needed or wanted from the armor. This was different from Mina or Finn, where he knew the target's needs and preferences intimately. Since he was making a full set for her from scratch, he wanted to let her give her opinion on what she preferred to enhance her current fighting style. "So I can make a wish?" she asked, her eyes open wide in excitement. "Yes, technically. But keep in mind, the base stats of the armor are," he continued to explain what the base armor would already be able to do. "The expected set effect, Sky Dragon magic, as well as the damage negation." He also slightly advocated a little for his favorite option for the forging ballad, but that fell on deaf ears. She wasn't like Seth, who valued the defense over anything. As such, she was not overly interested in the blacksmith's #1 go-to, damage reflection. But that didn't mean Seth couldn't appreciate her own perspective. She was confident in not getting hit and preferred an overall boost to her powers. Fainus advocated for passive skills and buffs to raise her stats and damage output. The blacksmith understood the intent to avoid making the battle too complicated by having to keep in mind various skills granted by equipment in addition to their own. The brigand wanted an armor that would only boost what was already there instead of adding powers she needed to learn and manage. That alone already made the conversation worth it, as Seth knew what kind of enchantments to avoid now. "Do you have any specific areas in mind you would want to supplement?" the blacksmith asked to get more into detail. He could make her a power armor to boost all areas, but focusing on what she really needed was more effective. "Well, I'm struggling with my mana and mental power when I don't have proper support items. Other than those, I rely on speed and strength," Fainus said vaguely, but it was enough for Seth to get a direction. The Sky Dragon magic would take care of the magic part, so Seth could focus on the enchantments on speed, attack power, and skill buffs. He could work with that. He was already getting ideas. "Thank you, Fainus. I think this is enough. I know enough to start planning," he said, eager to start planning and working out the blueprints. "Are you sure?" she asked, a little hesitant. They had been talking for maybe half an hour, and that seemed a little short to her. "Don't worry, now that I have a good idea of what direction we need to go, I can take it from here. You should get back to your room and rest. And maybe take a shower," the blacksmith said and slowly guided her out of the workshop. Fainus blushed, realizing her own situation. Although she wore a set of kind of fresh clothing, she was still drenched in sweat. After she hurried away, Seth started working on the blueprints for the adapted Sky Dragon armor. "Offices of Minazmar. Wait, what are you saying? I just called to say that I'm done with the repairs and improvements of WebNovel, and you want to ship me off." Jonia Taggart's voice came from the orb in Mary's hand. "Jonia, you have to listen. I'm not trying to ship you off, it's just that you are the best choice for this kind of exchange," Mary tried to explain. As a genius who had almost single-handedly managed to make a breakthrough in the combination of magic and engineering, there was no better candidate to send to the Magic College of Perarian than the fleet commanders of Epsilon. "What about Baker and his people? They aren't bad either." Jonia, who was currently enjoying her life as a shut-in researcher, argued back. She was not wrong. Y-City also made great advances in magic engineering, but that was a massive project forced by urgency and backed by a whole district, yet they still couldn't compare to Epsilon. "It won't be a good showing if we send too big a group and they have no experience with power armors, unlike you. Aren't you even a little interested? They managed to build power armors and giant mechs with common and uncommon materials. The team we sent estimates that they are almost as advanced as Krina or Spacia. Most importantly, they have crafting stations that allow normal people to build those things," the Chancellor added, "maybe the most important piece." Jonia let out a small gasp, and her expression in the orb was one of slight surprise. Mary knew that she was hooked. Currently, all magic engineering is still dependent on the class. No matter how educated one was, without the skills, one couldn't actually build anything. But if the machines carried the ability to build the parts, automation was possible. "Okay, tell me the details." Chapter 1373. Keep it for a while. Sea of Trees. "You want to keep WebNovel a little longer?" "I don't really mind," Evie said, chatting with Jonia. She was sitting on the veranda of their temporary camp, with a view over the vast forest at the foot of the massif. In the process of repairing and upgrading the undead core worm Evie had assimilated into her Hades, they had come to know each other better. Usually, they spoke about the various improvements and Jonia's progress. Today, she asked if she would be allowed to take Mold with her when she went to the College of Magic. Evie had already given her the right to command the almost legendary undead, since she would not have been able to work on it otherwise. Thank you, but are you sure? I meant to ask earlier, but what is going on your side? They had not been talking for long, but it was enough for Jonia to have a look at the scene behind Evie, where a giant, 9-headed, undead hydra was carpeting the lush forests in toxic green mists. Oh, we were attacked by a bunch of treants. Nothing big. Evie downplayed the mountains of broken and charred tree corpses that were piling up below their camp, just out of sight for Jonia to see the full extent of the attack. To think they actually ambushed us. Fucking treants, Allison commented, sitting down beside Evie. Although it was not the hanging tree, the alchemist had not expected any kind of tree to ambush them, like at all. She lacked the extensive knowledge of fantasy and pop culture like Seth, who knew that anything could be a mimic and any tree could be a treant. If it's nothing, why is Torrent going crazy in the background? Jonia asked about the undead Hydra's actions. Evie had renamed the Hydra, as she didn't quite like its previous name. As Heads was already taken, she chose a more modern name, inspired by Torrent websites of the past. Torrent is just making herself at home, Evie said with a shrug. It was in the nature of Hydra to settle in big, toxic swamps, and when there was no swamp, or it was not toxic, they would terraform it. Not only did Torrent feel calmer that way, but it was also a good defense against treants and other forest creatures. Oh, I see. Well, I don't want to take up any more of your time. Have fun on your mission going forward, Jonia ended their conversation. They all said their goodbyes and ended the call. With the call over, Allison turned to Evie. How are the scouts doing? She asked the necromancer. To find and potentially harvest useful herbs without endangering themselves, they had sent Evie's undead into the forest, instead of scout golems, who would have needed constant supervision for the same task. Eve had sent out a horde of undead a day ago, but there had been no updates on any really precious herbs so far. Some undead made it back with a bunch of uncommon plants, maybe a rare herb here and there, but nothing to write home about. Evie gave her an awkward smile. Nothing really new. The forest is more dangerous than we thought. Yesterday I already lost any golem below LV.50 I sent in, despite barely getting deeper inside. Now, I'm already starting to lose contact with some of my Leave 60s and Leave 70s. Still, no message about a herb that would need our attention, she said with a shrug. Allison leaned back on her chair, slightly disappointed. She had been looking forward to a paradise for alchemists, with rare and epic herbs growing left and right wherever they went. Of course, there was a little chance that the undead were unable to recognize the good stuff, but the chance was low. Even if they didn't know what plant it was, the undead could identify the living by their aura and life force. If they came across exceptional plants, they were supposed to call. Anything else, they could harvest themselves. Although their search for ingredients didn't bear immediate fruit, at least one of their main objectives had been fulfilled on the first day. It was not hard to find the seeds of the quick-growing trees. The forest floors were literally littered with them. Especially the edge, since this was a place where they could hardly take root. Since they had nothing to do until the undead gave feedback, Allison, Evie, and everyone else were simply watching the Hydra dissolve the nearby forest into a toxic sludge, or something else to pass time. Jess and James only occasionally joined them on the porch. Oh! Evie suddenly exclaimed a few hours later. The faces of the others sitting around her lit up. Was there finally a reason to get moving? Seeing them perk up, Evie gave an apologetic smile. Sorry to get you excited, it's just that I lost one of the undead spacious soldiers right now. It's the first Leave 80 undead I lost and it simply vanished without a fight, she explained her reaction. Many of the undead she sent into the forest were the expendable high zombies she had taken over after the Battle of Delta. She had split Nadina's forces with Hoskin. Wait, you just lost an undead in the 80s without as much as a warning? Edward asked, more surprised by that than if they found a magic herb. Although they were expendables, they were still undead forces left by the Chosen of Kali. They were actually quite proficient in battle, for one of them to just vanish. We knew these forests were dangerous. Look at the number of treants that suddenly came out like flies when a bait was dangling in front of their nose. Seth also said to be extremely careful, Evie argued back. Yeah, but the last time Seth was somewhere in these woods, he was like Leave 40 or something. I just didn't think there would be anything of that caliber this close to the edge, Edward mumbled as an answer. You forget that Seth always wore superior equipment, Bulko commented, sharing his knowledge as one of the two who knew Seth the longest in their current group. When he says it's dangerous, it is better to listen. I guess you are right. My fault, Edward said quietly. So, how far did that zombie get before you lost contact? Allison changed the subject. Evie stared into the emptiness before answering. I guess its presence vanished roughly 200 kilometers directly east from here, the necromancer estimated the distance. 200 kilometers was neither far nor close. Since they were looking for plants, the zombies were not too fast. Still, considering the size of the forest, that was still the edge. Would the Levadi undead even manage to get far enough into the forest to find anything? Evie's estimate made some of them doubtful when Evie let out another surprised sound. Did another one die? Lixus asked, eager for something to drive away the boredom. Nope, we got a hit. The zombie was on the way back when he found it. Evie revealed with a wide grin. What is it? What is it? Allison asked excitedly. Things finally started moving. Give me a moment, I'm checking right now, Evie said and started sharing vision with the undead that just signaled to have found something. When the picture became clearer, as clear as a pair of rotten eyes could perceive, she saw a field of white flowers with violet stems. The zombie and the field were standing in the twilight of a steep canyon, like a crack in a giant boulder. The dim lighting allowed the flowers to glow in a soft white light. It was obvious that they were no ordinary flowers. However, those were just uncommon tainted moon flowers. The undead were enough to take samples of these kinds of herbs. The reason the undead had signaled back was the massive but unassuming brown bulb with a couple of stems of dark green leaves on top. It was growing in the shadow of the rock wall. Sage root, crafting material. Epic. A plant that can reach sentience upon blooming, turning into a powerful forest sage. Potions and extracts of this plant have strong effects on intelligence, mana, willpower, and magic multipliers. Chapter 1374 No care for uncommon. We will have to extract that one ourselves, Evie said after checking the plant the undead had found. In general, all herbs above the common rating needed a certain level in herb gathering, otherwise there was a drop in quality leading to a worse potion effect, or even the brewing process to fail. The reason they left most sample gathering to the undead was that they didn't really care for uncommon and many rare herbs. Unless it was a high-quality herb like the sage root, they were okay with small, slightly lower quality samples, since it was not their main objective. Although they wanted to get potion ingredients, this part of their mission was more explorative than exploitative. Depending on their findings, they may set up a tree station in this place in the future, but that was way further down the line. Collecting the ingredients was more of a side quest, while they were looking for a hanging tree, even when it was the part that the alchemist and the witch were most excited for. All right, everyone, get on the chopper. We are going out to harvest, Allison instructed after Evie explained what the undead had found. Although it was a side mission, it was one of the only two reasons for the team to step inside the green hell. Finally, the elven blood spoke out of Lixus. She was probably as excited to get into the woods as the Teutonic enthusiasts. Where are Jess and James? Evie asked, although they all knew where they were and what they were doing. She only asked first, so it would be her who had to get them. Edward, could you call the two? Allison asked the brother of the necromancer without mercy. The Fainus expression made it quite clear that he disliked it as much as everyone else, but he took the task with a grim nod. But when he was about to knock on the door, it already opened on its own. No need, no need. We are here, James came out, followed by Jess. Both were already wearing their full loadout. Only the disheveled hair bore witness to what they did inside. It wasn't like the others didn't understand, but did they have to do it all the time while they were out in no man's land? Since everyone is here, let's go, Allison ended that topic and asked everyone to get in the shuttle. According to Evie, the sage route was a little more than 60 kilometers northeast of their camp. Since the undead were bringing back a rare herb it found, it was much closer than expected. Using their flying bus, it was barely a distance that needed to be mentioned. Setting off from the foothills of the central mountain range, the party rose in the sky. Below them was the vast sea of trees. Although they had spent the past 2 days looking at it from their camp, it was still a sight to behold when flying over it. Oh wow, what is that? They had a peaceful 15 minutes in the air, when James' eyes locked on what looked like a tree crown that came alive. A mass of swirling leaves, reminding them of Seth's description of the wolf-shaped meat grinders, was rising from the green ocean. I have never seen a beast like that, Lixus said, fascinated, watching a creature emerge from the tree and trying to follow the shuttle. Leaf 45. A bird-shaped cloud of whirling leaves was emerging from the trees like a tidal wave, aiming for the shuttle, only to be shot down by a quickly cast fireball. It's a high-pitched flutter, the bird made of leaves turned into a tragic phoenix, as the flames greedily swallowed its body. It looks exotic, but it doesn't stand much, Jess, who wanted to test the beast with a simple fireball, said, a little disappointed. Well, what was she supposed to expect from a Leaf 45 beast? Ah, I wanted to observe it a little longer, the part elf said, also a little disappointed. The burning cloud of leaves had quickly turned to ashes and fell back below the tree cover. Sorry, I didn't expect it to just poof, Jess apologized to the sad Lixus. It looked like a mix of plants and wind. What did you expect would happen to it if you ignited it? James commented jokingly. I mean, obviously, not that it would just poof, Jess defended herself. Enough with the bickering, we are arriving soon, Evie said from the driver's seat. She didn't even get to see the new monster, so she didn't feel like listening to their regrets about killing it too quickly. Overall, they needed roughly 40 minutes to reach the small mountains, which looked like a boulder dropped in the middle of the forest. It had a distinctive crack going roughly through the middle, creating the gorge Evie had seen through her subordinate. Despite expecting the forest to be filled with monsters, they had only met one on the way, and there were no signs of anything in the vicinity of the rock. Normally, that meant this was the territory of a monster that kept others away, but Evie's undead was still alive, staring at the sage root. The shuttle lowered onto the bald top of the split rock, which had so far resisted being covered in lush green vegetation. Next, Evie opened a portal to her personal Hades below the shuttle, dropping a horde of her experimental undead monsters on the rock to secure the vicinity. The obscure creatures Evie had gained from their battle with the maestro of the Adventurer Guild's Holy Land were still her favorite force. Not only were they highly varied and adaptive, but they had also grown neatly since she took possession of them. Always makes me feel useless when I see her open that gate, Edward mumbled, getting a sympathetic nod from James. The two were here as the tanks and physical damage dealers of the party, but most of their roles were substituted by Evie's undead army. Moving with impeccable coordination, the undead combed through the nearby forest, and a mage zombie set up a protective barrier surrounding the field of flowers and the sage root. While they were waiting for Evie's okay, there was a huge explosion in the nearby forest, as it was swallowed by violet flames and heavy black smoke. Looks like something tried to ambush the lurker, the necromancer commented. The lurker was her name for one of the undead experiments, which looked like a buff, upright walking newt. It was armored like a crocodile, and the maestro had somehow given it the ability to not just breathe, but explode in cursed flames. Not only was their team smartly chosen based on the forest's weakness to fire, but Evie had also made sure to send out the most effective undead to secure the place. A few minutes and some smaller incidents later, the chosen of Persephone gave her okay. The undead had secured the complete perimeter of the rocky mountain. Their shuttle came to a halt above the crack, and the team lowered down into the barrier set up by the zombie sorcerer. While Allison quickly harvested the tainted moonflowers, Evie began working on the sage root. Sage root itself was already a good ingredient, but there was an even better use for it, to let it bloom artificially. By supplying the root with various potions and tonics, a skilled alchemist or witch could actually tame the creature it would turn into upon blooming. The forest sage was a powerful monster in its own right, making it a good option for a pet. But it reached its full potential as the pet of an alchemist or herbalist. As a plant-based caster, the forest sage was a renewable source of alchemy materials, especially strong mana recovery and mana reinforcement potions. This was why it was of utmost importance to harvest the sage root alive to replant it in Minazmar's herb gardens. As for who would get the new pet, they had already decided that Allison would take the forest sage, since Evie already had her undead and was not fully committed to the alchemist profession. There were no difficulties in the harvesting process, and they were able to quickly load the herbs on the shuttle. Even the human-sized bulb was quickly loaded, and they were ready to leave. As Evie collected her troop of monsters back, she also released another horde of zombies, which would continue to scout the forest further, starting from this place. With that, they were ready to return. Couldn't we make a little detour to see what happened to your zombie that vanished? Since we are already in the air, I mean, Lixus suggested once the shuttle was back in the air. It seemed like the quarter elf still had not had enough of flying around the forest. I am a little curious, Evie agreed with her. Well, fine, then let's go take a look, Allison said after some hesitation. Chapter 1375 Only survivor asterisk. Doesn't the forest look kinda, not okay? James asked hesitatingly, looking at the horizon. At the suggestion of Lixus, they had made a. Doesn't the forest look kinda, not okay? James asked hesitatingly, looking at the horizon. At the suggestion of Lixus, they had made a detour on their way back to see what happened to the undead that had suddenly vanished without warning. In the distance, close to the horizon, the verdant green seemed to take on a dull grey hue, as if something sucked the color out of the world. Isn't it just because it's so far away? Jess asked doubtfully. No need to argue, we are getting closer to it anyway, Evie commented. The place where she lost contact with her subordinate was a little further up ahead, so they would get a better look soon. They had almost reached the place when the elf asked a question. Did any of you ever see a beast like that? Lixus asked curiously, pointing a little further behind them, where a black silhouette had appeared in the sky. Everyone except Evie, the driver, turned to look at the beast Lixus was pointing at. The creature had the muscular build of a lion and the head of a bird of prey with a massive black beak. It seemed to have several tails and flew with big leathery bat wings, fitting its black skin, glinting like polished leather. I feel like it resembles something Seth mentioned a long time ago, Allison said, unsure. I also think Seth mentioned something like that before, Bulko agreed. Griffin of Corruption Leave 85. It's pretty strong, Edward commented, having appraised the pursuer. It wasn't just Leave 85, but its attributes were higher than its level suggested, making it closer to an elite beast, if they were in a dungeon. Aren't we close to the place you undead vanished? Maybe it was that thing. Edward suggested. A monster of that level with elite stats wouldn't have any problem killing a Leave 80 zombie soldier in a single attack. At that size, it might have just dived and bit the head off. Should I take it down for now? It seems to be hunting the shuttle. Jess suggested getting rid of the pursuer for now. Maybe it is better if I do it. If we want to check it out, we should have an intact corpse, Allison said, bringing out her own staff. Jess specialized in fire magic, while the wizard/alchemist was proficient in all elements. Vacuum prison, Allison said coldly, finishing her spell with almost no casting. The black beast was suddenly surrounded by a ball of vapor swirling around it at rapid speed. As the name suggested, it was a magically created sphere of fast winds that created a near-perfect vacuum inside. When the beast lost the support of air below its wings, it fell, but not far. The moment it touched the rapids surrounding it, it was flung around, like a washcloth in the washing machine. They could hear the breaking of bones even at this distance, as its wing got sucked into the wind and its whole body began rotating so fast that the whole spell looked like a black ball exuding white vapor. Where in the world did you learn such a spell? Lixus asked, horrified. She knew the spell Air Prison, which was similar, but had never heard of this abomination of a spell. Obviously, you never heard of it. I made it myself based on my knowledge and the knowledge from Minazmar's library, the wizard bragged. Alchemy wasn't the only thing she did all day long. Since Nico was even busier than her, she would spend much of her free time in the library and sometimes experiment on spells. We should fly closer to the sphere, so we can collect the corpse, once I deactivate the magic, Allison added to Evie. The necromancer nodded and steered the shuttle to fly back toward the trapped heap of misery left of the beast. I will collect it, Edward said, coming forward for the task of catching it. Timing it with Allison, the wizard deactivated the wind sphere. The moment the flesh-tearing magic vanished, Edward gave the black beast a slap to collect it into his inventory. However, it didn't. The slap echoed loudly, and then the mangled mass of black leather started falling to the ground, distinctly not entering his inventory. Shit, it was still alive after that, the Faer exclaimed inadvertently. Nobody blamed him, everyone was shocked that the thing actually managed to survive the spin cycle Allison subjected it to. Edward looked back at them awkwardly. Should we land and get it? He asked hesitantly, feeling a little bad for not properly catching it. However, Allison shook her head. It's not that important. I don't want to get down there just to look for a half-dead beast. What number's more interesting is that tree line, the alchemist said, pointing at the horizon. What James commented on had already become much clearer to see. See, I told you, James said to Jess, when he was proven right. The trees in the distance were fading to grey, while the horizon had become a black line. It was indisputable that something weird was going on with this forest. This is concerning. What do you think could cause this? Volko asked the two potion makers who had the most plant-based knowledge on the ship. However, neither Evie nor Allison had any explanation at hand. That's why I'm saying we should put our attention to that, rather than some random beast. I have a bad feeling about it, Allison said honestly. Now that I see it, I feel like Seth also mentioned black trees at some point. Do you think this could be the griffin-like beast he mentioned? Lixis suddenly mentioned the blacksmith again. Right, he did, but he came across that close to B-City. That is still far away from here, Allison said doubtfully, but also remembering the blacksmith story. To this day, Seth was the only known survivor who managed to get out of Avernum. The district was on the eastern end of the continent, half a continent away from them. This couldn't be the same black forest the blacksmith had been talking about. The bigger problem was that Seth also never seemed to have known the cause of the difference in the forest. Let's take a quick look and then return, Evie suggested. Since they were already this close, they could spend another 30 minutes to have a look at the grey and black trees on the horizon. They all agreed to get closer for now. As they got closer to the border in the middle of the forest, they also came across more corrupted beasts like the griffin. Some were more like distorted birds, others like malformed bats. The latter often resembled monsters that spontaneously sprouted bat wings on their back instead of having them from birth. They didn't pose a threat to the party, but the change was disconcerting nonetheless. But it wasn't the worst news they got by getting closer to the Black Forest. When they were finally close enough to see the transition from green to grey to black, they saw something else in the distance, deep in the Black Forest. Well, this is just our luck, isn't it? James commented amid the curses of the others. Off in the distance, amid the giant black trees, stood one tree that towered above all others. Apart from its black crown, it was a familiar sight. They had found what they were looking for, technically. At the horizon stood a black hanging tree exuding an ominous aura. Chapter 1376. Black hanging tree. Minazmar. A black hanging tree, he asked, surprised. Seth had researched fitting ballads for the rest of the day and began trying around using blueprint this morning. The blacksmith was practically done with the armor blueprint for Fainus by the time he was interrupted by a call. Lena had called him shortly after Allison and her team reported back about their finding in the southern forests. The description of the place raised the hair on his nape, reminding him of the time when he had to run for his life. The black forests filled with darkness were still vividly in his mind. But there was a darker conclusion he arrived at when he heard about it again today. At the beginning of his journey, Seth rarely had time to question his adventures and the scenarios happening around him. Not that he really wanted to do so either. He was glad when he didn't have to think about the time when his life tended to hang on a thin thread. But hearing about the black forests again, and the creepy beasts that lived inside, jogged his memory. The corruption. An unknown force that tended to appear in the world across the patchworks. Where it appeared, it started to taint and defile the local land and anything living on it. The first explanation of this Seth heard ages ago, from Puffle's family. Ivisor were a race created by the god of the sky, not unlike angels in mythology. Their god died fighting the corruption that emerged on their land, and the nightmare centipedes kept watch to keep the source from spreading. At the time, he had faced the undead corpses of former warriors and kings that had been forced to leave their graves by the corruption. He had even faced a corrupted Ivisor at the time. The similarities were striking. Looking back, it was clear that the black forest he traveled through after leaving B-City was touched by the power of corruption. It had created the weird griffin beasts and probably other, similarly ugly monsters. The fact that Allison and the others actually found another black forest, so far from the place he saw it, meant that it was either emerging from several places, or spreading across an enormous area. Considering what he knew about the corruption, this was no good news. It's probably a sign of corruption. We have to act quickly and send a team with the appropriate equipment to set up a barrier formation, Lena said to his surprise. For a moment, he was surprised that the princess knew what the corruption was, then he remembered who she was. As a princess from Krina, she spent most of her life learning how to manage territories across the system worlds and actively doing so. Thinking about it, it was most likely the Starta village that had kept the corruption in the forest, hindering it from spreading further into the continent. The corruption is, Lena was ready to explain, but didn't get to. I heard of the corruption, Seth mumbled, interrupting her without really paying attention. He was too occupied with being annoyed by what it meant to have a source of corruption in their world. As if they didn't have bad shit left and right. Now they even contracted the world-ending disease from the Pathworks. Then you understand the urgency of this matter. We need to act quickly and contain it. The princess skipped the explanation and went to what had to be done. However, although Seth had heard of the corruption before, he didn't have some supreme god to throw at it lying around. Do we even have the means to do something? The blacksmith asked curiously. He guessed that the system church may know something, but did their congregation have the same means as the original system church from Krina? It will be a little sparse, but Simon has what it takes to put up barriers to buy some time, Lena assured him. But we have to act quickly. We need to find the magnitude of the outbreak and contain it so it can't spread further than it already did, she insisted. Seth thought of his theory that there might be several outbreaks and not just one. The alternative being that more than half the forest was already contaminated. That would be an area the size of several districts. What if it's already too late? He asked and explained his worries. It's not unusual for the corruption to emerge at several places in an area, but if it's already swallowed half the forest, it would have already formed a chasm, Lena explained grimly. A chasm? Seth asked with furrowed brows. He felt like he had heard something similar from the Ivisors, but he wasn't sure what it was. It's a phenomenon that happens when the corruption grows especially strong in an area. At first, it only taints and defiles the local life, then the land, and then it creates a literal black chasm. It's a hole that nobody knows where it leads, but it will constantly spew out more obscure monsters and the power of corruption. Things will become incredibly hard if that already happened, and when things go unhindered, Lena made a theatrical pause. We may have to face a beast of corruption, she said ominously, as if Seth was supposed to know what that meant. What would the best of corruption be like? He asked, obviously not knowing what it meant. It's like the descent of the divine avatar of an evil god, but actually worse. I only read about them in some old book, and the descriptions differed from being a massive skeleton covered in tar and flames to a black slime the size of a mountain. The point is that these things will actively spread the corruption with incredible force. Seth sighed. As if we didn't already have enough problems at hand. Okay, send reinforcement to Allison's team and do everything we can to contain that. This gets top priority, the blacksmith said after hearing the possible consequences. I actually already prepared a team, but, Lena hesitated a moment. What? The blacksmith urged her to continue. Finn and Mina are insisting on being on the team, the princess revealed. She knew how much they meant to Seth, so she hesitated to send them without his consent. The bard fell silent, and his lips became thin. He knew exactly why the girls wanted to go on this mission. Both had gotten their new toys just recently and wanted to test them out, but this was not just about the items he gave them. Their pets had also hatched. There was no problem with Mina's wolf puppy. It already showed the strength one would expect of such an expensive pet, despite still being a baby. However, Finn's behemothling needed more food. Although they managed to provide the bare minimum thanks to Karina and her disciples growing trees for it to eat, it was only growing slowly. Seth was 99% sure Finn jumped at the chance to feed a forest to her pet, and Mina decided to go along. Did he want them to run into danger like this? No. If he thought he could, he may have tried to stop them. But who was he kidding? The blacksmith took a deep breath, trying to come to terms with the fact that the only thing he could do in this situation was trust them, their skills, and the items he made for them. He would have gone along, but his role was not in the field. If they insist, then send them along, but make it clear that the first go is just a reconnaissance mission and they are not to engage with anyone, the bard cautioned her. Of course, then I will get everything ready to send them to Allison, Lena nodded with a wry smile. What about Mike's team? Aren't they the closest? Seth asked when he thought of the other team in the south, but Lena already shook her head before he finished speaking. Mike and the rest are already past Beta, going further into the unclaimed mountains. They would need ages to get back for support, Lena explained, having already considered that option. However, maybe you could try contacting Ceres and Puffles. Lena suggested. Puffles? Seth asked, surprised. He understood Ceres, whom he had sent to support Mike in his siege, but why Puffles? You didn't read the report. I got the summary. Puffles met Ceres on the way and accompanied him to help Mike. Puffles should also be somewhere in Beta right now, Lena explained. So that's where he was playing around, the blacksmith exclaimed in realization. He didn't know what made Puffles go along with Ceres, but if they were close, it would calm him a lot, knowing that Ceres and Puffles were there to back up Finn and Mina. Of course, the others, too. Sure, I will contact the two to join the support team in THRES. Chapter 1377 speed and strength. Puffles still didn't answer his calls, but Ceres picked up his communication orb. The Parrot of Doom spoke for both of them. The two were still in the vicinity of THRES, so it was no problem for them to wait for the reinforcement to arrive. With that out of the way, Seth got the chance to focus on his own responsibilities. He had put some time into planning out the armor for Fainus, even slightly changing the design, to make it more imposing. It was not just magic that could play into an intimidation effect. Apart from that, he had spent his time mostly researching and practicing ballads that could grant passive effects, which were related to speed and strength. The blacksmith intended to cover them, especially speed, mostly using the forging ballads. With everything planned out, he started with the leg armor. He would have liked to start with the boots, but he left making the boots of wing leather to Nadal, who had recently finished Mina's equipment and became a master. The ballad was created by a demon poet who called himself Consent, if the blacksmith translated the name loosely. With the name Fast like Oculos, it called upon a maritime demon, who specialized in speed and ambushes. For the leg armor, he brought out one of the large dragon scales. Seth loosened his shoulders and signaled Cerberus to come help him. Like when he made the gauntlets for Bart, he needed to start off by preparing his material sheets. Then he could continue forging the leg armor. Although they were not as resilient as the ancient scales he used for the scorpion armor, the Sky Dragon heart scales were a little tough. To save time and energy, he was going to have Cerberus support him in forging the legendary materials. As energy started circulating through his trusty hammer, Ounce suddenly started playing a weird, ethereal music. But just for a moment. The demon lyre started torturing his chords, and a demonic tune shook the workshop, followed by the beat of the hammer and Seth's unholy wail. Brimming with power, Charon's obol and Cerberus' fists started pummeling the thick scale on the anvil. With every strike, magic force sank into the dragon scale, and with every word, demonic runes started floating around him. Unfortunately, the recent call had muddled his thoughts a little and Seth forgot one important step in the preparation of the forging ballad. He forgot to check whether the door of the workshop was properly closed, thus the music travelled unbeknownst to the blacksmith. A wail sounded through the hall of Minazmar. In terror, Whedon and Hone realized that the blacksmith had forgotten to seal his door again. They quickly put their tools aside, as the demonic ballad weakened their legs and drilled into their brains. It was a fast cacophony, led by the strikes of the hammer. The workshop seemed too dark, as if the fires and furnaces had fallen silent. Following the wail and the music, a demonic voice snuck into their ears and ran a cold shower down their spines. "You better beware. You better take care," it cautioned them ominously. "The time has come, and he's the one who's breathing down your neck." Coming from behind, Whedon jumped around, looking behind him. For a moment, he was convinced someone was behind him. "Calm down, Whedon. It's just," Hone tried to calm him. Even if the forging ballads sometimes caused visions, they were not actually dangerous. However, he was interrupted by the demonic bard's unholy song. "Fast as a shark, he'll cut out of the dark, he's a killer, he'll rip out your heart." "Shit!" Hone cursed and jumped under a workbench for cover, when he thought to see a shadow figure strike for his chest. For a moment, he was sure he had been hit, but when he grabbed at his chest to cover the wound, there was nothing. "It's just vision, nothing dangerous," he finished his sentence and cleared his throat. He was slightly embarrassed. Surprise attack! Coming from the back. An expert of the deadly knack. The moment they heard it, the dwarves stood back to back, staring into the darkness. Knowing something wasn't dangerous didn't mean they were not tense. Cold sweat covered their body when the demonic bard cautioned them again to be careful, shortly before shadowy silhouettes kept appearing from the darkness, trying to attack them. The two shared a glance. This couldn't go on like this. They knew that Seth was working on the Sky Dragon armor design for Fainus. The fact that he started to sing meant he had begun to forge it. This music could potentially go on for hours. Could they endure this until then? Not needing to articulate their thoughts, they understood each other with that one glance and nodded. Together, they slowly made their way toward the door of their workshop, laboriously resisting the side effects of the demonic forging ballad by supporting one another. Sweating and panting, their eyes bloodshot, the two dwarves made it out and onto the hallway outside. As if fighting against a storm, the two were forced to almost crawl across the stone floor between their door to their workshop and that of Seth, which was a small distance further down the hallway. Tortured by the constant jump scares, they finally made it to the door, which was just slightly ajar. If it wasn't for the mind-disrupting music echoing through the hallways and their skulls, it would have looked shut, and nobody would have noticed. With Whedon supporting his back, Hone made it past the few meters. He managed to grasp the door handle and eventually pull the door shut. The moment it properly closed, a magic formation lit up across the dark wood of the workshop door, completing the sound seal. Finally, silence. The two dwarfs sank to the ground, leaning against the wall right beside the door. Not a single note made it out of the workshop anymore, and the dark visions and feeling of threat vanished. Breathing heavily, they had to take a moment to recover. Good work. Well done. The two blacksmiths congratulated each other when they could speak again and shook hands, and that was it. Once strength returned to their legs, the dwarves got up and walked back to their workshop. Did you manage to close the door? Liam, the arcane blacksmith who had been recruited together with Neil Repmar, asked. He had only managed to leave his workshop after the music had stopped. Yep, no need to thank us, Hone waved off. Still, maybe we should talk to the tower master about this later, Liam suggested. Although it didn't happen often, Seth did forget to properly close his door sometimes. Nah, leave him alone with such nullities. Seth already has enough to do as is. This isn't bad enough to bother him with. It's not like we would have died, Whedon said with a shrug. It had only been a few minutes, but the dwarves had already mostly recovered. In the end, it were just visions and stress. What happened to the music? Neil Repmar joined them belatedly. However, he seemed fine. Unlike them, who looked like they were put through the ringer, he just looked sweaty from hard work. We managed to close the door, no need to thank us, Whedon said. However, Neil looked for disappointed than thankful. Could we open it a little again? I just got into the groove, the indomitable blacksmith honored his name. It seemed that he had been barely bothered by the music, and even liked it. Maybe they all had to raise their mental resistance. Seeing Neil not bothered at all, Liam agreed not to mention this matter to Seth. Maybe it was a nullity, and it was he who had to improve. About the author. Chapter 1378 Goddess of Wisdom. The demonic runes generated from his song were melded into the dragon material. The azure color of the scales was slowly turning to a more royal blue, taking on a shiny gloss as the power of Oculos was sinking into the material. Once the scale was flattened to an even sheet, Seth and Cerberus separated it into the two halves before the golem slowly retreated from the crafting process. At this point, the blacksmith didn't need any assistance to continue. The demonic ballad kept shaking the workshop as Seth powered through the forging process. Juggling various skills to shape the metal and endure the demonic presence summoned by channeling, the armor slowly took shape. Oculos was a hunter of the dark seas, striking from an ambush, using tremendous speeds. The ballad fit Fainus' needs, as it would imbue a skill to raise speed and the damage of a surprise attack. But it had another advantage. It came without additional cost. The shark demon was not of the scheming or mercantile kind, but a pure sugar daddy. If he liked the performance of your work, he would offer his power freely. No strings attached. This took off the financial pressure, especially since Tunamole had yet to stock up. On the other hand, it raised the stakes for Seth to perform properly. Although he had a great talent for demonic music, as much as he lacked it for normal music, it was still a mental pressure to do his best. Sweat was quickly running down his face in a constant stream, but the armor was slowly taking shape under his unfaltering strikes. Radiant Forge right, as well as its skill absolute focus and craftsman's precision really helped him in this situation. Under his hammer, each half of the scale turned into a cuisse that would wrap around Fainus' thigh and a Pauline to cover the knee. Once he had the boots from Natal, he would make the greaves to perfectly fit the boots and connect with the upper leg armor. But that was the future. For now, the ballad finally faded out as he finished his work. Oh God, I need a shower, the blacksmith mumbled, having finished forging the cuisses and Paulines after 4 hours of continuous forging. After thinking it over for a moment, Seth handed the parts to Cerberus to refine them a little more while he was gone. Fainus, can you come to the workshop in an hour? Want to make sure the parts sit before I continue. He contacted the chosen of Phobos to fit the armor. He intended to use the hour to go shower. Using the power of the tower, he ported to his quarters. Appearing in the bedroom, he found Mina and Finn getting ready to set off. Seth? We aren't leaving until this evening. You didn't have to interrupt your work to say goodbye. Mina said, surprised, seeing the blacksmith suddenly appear in the foot of the bed. Seth looked at them packing stuff and quickly remembered that they had volunteered to join the reinforcement for the forest. "Ah, actually, I came because I needed a shower," he said with an amused smile, picking at his shirt, which was so drenched it stuck to him. He could have used lifestyle magic, but he yearned for a proper shower and a change in clothing. "You want to clean up?" Mina suddenly asked with a certain expression. Without him noticing, the human-sized fin had latched onto his arm. He instantly knew where this was going. "How about we help you wash up?" the fairy asked lasciviously. "You will be alone for some time once we are on the mission, so," Mina also appeared on his other arm. He did want to return to the workshop as quickly as possible, however, there was no need for them to convince him. He felt no need to disagree with a long shower. A little more tired than before his long shower, Seth returned to the workshop, clean and wearing fresh clothes. When he returned to the workshop, he found Fainus already waiting inside, her arms crossed. She seemed a little pissed. Looking at the clock, he understood why. His shower took a squeaky hour longer than he had anticipated to be away, meaning Fainus had already been waiting for an hour. He had completely forgotten about her. "Sorry, I took a little longer than expected and forgot to inform you," he apologized honestly. Fainus sighed and nodded. "It's fine. Since I don't get to be part of the reinforcement sent south because of the armor, it's not like I have anything else to do. Technically, being here as your tailor puppy is my only duty at the moment," she joked and struck a model pose. "I'm glad you understand. Here's the leg armor. Try putting it on and moving around. Tell me if there are any places that feel uncomfortable," the blacksmith instructed. Taking the half-finished equipment from Seth, she used the system function to equip her usual underarmor and the pair of armor pieces. Having equipped them, she first started walking around, then running, then jumping around like an acrobat. She was like a cat having its zoomies, moving about the workshop. She finally came to a halt, a big smile on her face. "Wow, do these already have an enchantment? I feel quicker, and there is no discomfort at all. How did you manage to do that with just my measurement?" she asked excitedly. "You know, skill, talent, and having the system help a lot once I have the measurements. I take you are happy with how they sit and feel," he asked the obvious, just to make sure. Fainus had no negative comments or suggestions for improvement. So he had the green light to finish the quizzes. "I will call you when I have other parts to try on. For you, you can leave. I will go ahead and finish these," the blacksmith suggested, ready to put some enchantments on the quizzes. However, Fainus stayed. "Could I maybe watch?" she asked a little hesitantly. Seth lifted an eyebrow in surprise, but didn't say no. "Well, I don't really mind, but it's nothing exciting to watch," Seth warned her, but it didn't discourage her. Apparently, she was so bored at this point that watching the blacksmith engrave her armor was something entertaining. Cinema Dimension. Seated at the big cinema, many were following the happenings on Earth from various perspectives. Many avatars were interested in the new threat arising in the south. Others were looking forward to the clash with the cultivators. Some oddballs, like Hestia, kept watching the negotiation with the magma people. "Look at that, now he is wasting that precious material on your champion, because you are too stingy to even bless a material for her," Hephaestus made a spicy comment about his nephew Phobos. Despite all the things and perspectives offered by Earth, the core audience in the room was still focused on Seth and the perspectives of Minazmar. The little blacksmith was lucky that 2 of his 3 patrons, not Seth, respected his privacy. Thus, the 2 hours in the bathroom were not screened. "Hey, just because I'm not as desperate as Mahis or WebNovel, doesn't mean I have power to spare. I have 2 saints to support and another champion. If I gave every mortal I find interesting part of me, the world would drown in fear," Phobos made excuses. What neither of the 2, especially not Hephaestus, knew was that there was someone else in the room catching unexpected strays from their conversation. Athena was a great goddess, just like Hephaestus and Hades. She had more than enough resources, unlike Phobos, to support Monique. Hearing their talk, the goddess felt called out for being cheap. She wouldn't have cared if it was some crude dog like Ares doing so, but it were the words of Hephaestus. Would he think she was cheap, too? He may not say it in her face like with Phobos, but she didn't want him to think she was cheap. But if she decided to act now, it would only look like she did it to not seem cheap. The truth was that it was not common for gods to support their champions to this extent. The skills granted were supposed to be enough, so it was not on her mind. It were the Egyptian gods that kicked off this unhealthy trend. Technically, maybe it were Seth and Hephaestus that kicked it off, by giving the little blacksmith the power to refine their metals. Anyway, the situation was as it was, and she didn't want Heffy to think she was cheap or vain. Even if she was a little of both, she didn't want him to think of her like that. Still, she was the goddess of wisdom, and she quickly came up with a good excuse. Fine, fine, if there is a chance, I will do something, she heard Phobos exclaim, guilt into spending some more power on his champion. Chapter 1379 Unseen Speed. Fainus had asked for the basic treatment, so Seth decided on exactly that for the enchantments. Also, because he didn't really have a better option. At this point, Seth had various advanced options for basic improvement, but none that he could use here. He had unlocked the minor Olympian enchantments, which had a good effect, but could only be used on Olympian silver. He also learned the blueprint of the Slaughterer's set, but he wasn't making that set right now and had yet to figure out how to apply its enchantments independently of the blueprint. Also, he didn't have a legendary enchantment for agility. This only left him with advanced enchantments, but that didn't mean the blacksmith had no ace up his sleeve. The blacksmith's collection of enchantment had become well-rounded, as he constantly kept browsing the auction house for interesting effects. Using the combination option he had unlocked by becoming a master, Seth combined the enchantments for enhanced agility and enhanced movement speed. This created an amalgamated enchantment he called Mighty Speed Enchantment. Adding Seth's various bonuses, a single enchantment was able to raise her agility by 90 points and her movement speed by 20%. The combined enchantment was a little weaker than either of the enchantments on their own, but he wouldn't have been able to place both enchantments on the quizzes because of their complexity. Like this, he got 80 to 90% of their power and was able to place one on each leg armor. This way, Fainus would gain 180 points in agility and an additional 40% movement speed, where it would have been 100 points in agility and plus 25% movement speed otherwise. Would you like any specific decoration? The blacksmith asked, as he was following the outlines of the generated enchantment. The enchantment table was projected onto the piece for him. Depending on his mood, he would sometimes add embellishing engravings, etchings, or decoration to hide the enchantment. Since the receiver was here, he thought to ask. Maybe silver ornaments? I think some white silver embellishments with a floral pattern would look quite nice on the royal blue, Fainus suggested, surprising Seth with the rather specific idea. Specific, but he didn't dislike it. It was a technique he usually didn't use, but he had the needed material at hand. In this case he was not talking about silver or gold, they always had those on hand, since they former precious metals became quite cheap as common materials. No, he was thinking about matrices that were used to press metal foils into a certain pattern. Seth knew that Tord had brought his huge collection of matrices for decorative elements with him when he moved to Minazmar. He was sure he could borrow some later. Alas! Fainus, since you seem to have a picture in mind, how about you go give a visit to Tord? Ask him to show you his matrix collection and choose the ones you like to bring back. He left the work of choosing decorations for her armor to the bandit. Oh cool! Then I will leave you to your work. I will bring you your matricularies, she said happily and was out of the workshop before Seth even had the chance to correct her bad vocabulary. Shaking his head with a light smile, Seth continued engraving. Fainus still wasn't back by the time he finished enchanting the two quizzes. It was a good thing that the decorations held no meaning to the item itself, so he could proceed with the next step without a problem. Of course, the next step was giving it a soul. Fortunately, Seth had never been too keen on souls focused on speed. Although his own stash was burned out, except for the refined dragon newt souls, Tanamol still had a few fitting souls, despite failing to stock up. Thinking back, the goat demon seemed to want to say something, but ultimately only asked for a meeting once Seth was done with the first sky dragon armor. The bard worried what Tanamol could want to talk about. He hoped the demon wasn't going to close the store. It would have been a real pain if he did. Then Seth would have had to procure his souls himself. Once again, the blacksmith thought that he really needed to talk with the demon about his tech. Creating equipment for Minazmar that could capture at least the souls dropped upon death would be a great help, especially if the demon really intended to end business. For now, he was happy to have gotten his hands on 4 big, epic, and mostly fitting souls to use for the armor. He needed 6, but he was going to use 2 of the refined dragon newt souls for helmet and cuirass. With the 4 souls, he would turn boots, cuisses, gauntlets, and pauldrons into sets respectively. This helped streamline the effects Fainus was going to experience and lower the chance of magical effects clashing and weakening the overall performance when worn completely. The sole he chose for the boots was one he would have liked for his own armor, if the goat had had it back then. It was called Soul of the Hidden Depth. The big epic rated soul belonged to a hunter of the deep oceans, which had a very peculiar skill and a nice trait. The trait was called Speed Killer and raised physical damage by the same amount as the additional movement speed. The skill that was explicitly mentioned in the description was called Faster Than the Eyes and lowered the user's presence based on their speed. Since the shape of the quizzes was not overly complicated, the soul forging didn't take the blacksmith long, and he could quickly transition to enchanting the soul armaments. He actually changed the enchantment when he saw the power of the soul. Originally, he had intended to use minor Olympian stamina on the soul of the quizzes, as this fit the upper leg the best. The enchantment would have helped with the recovery of stamina. Keeping an eye on fatigue couldn't be neglected when Fainus was going around like a flashy speedster. However, he had a better fit for the soul, one that could greatly raise movement speed for short bursts. The whole combination may have been better for her armor boots, but Seth already had a configuration planned for those and was unwilling to change that. Tiner's dash was an effect that would increase the movement speed by 5% for 5 seconds, with every step. This effect could be stacked up to 150% additional movement speed. That allowed the user to double their speed within 20 steps. Although it sounded powerful, pure speed was not always useful in battle. It was really an enchantment that could only shine together with the user's skills or other effects of the item. Especially since it used a certain level of skill to keep the buff on the max. But that was less of a concern with Fainus. He added no other enchantment, considering that Tiner's dash was already a circuit that combined a great variety of other effects. He was about finished when... "Oh, is this what it looks like when you are working on a soul armament?" Fainus, who had just returned to the workshop, asked with interest. While souls looked close to solid objects for Seth, normal people couldn't see them at all. Even when made into a soul armament, others could barely see their contours, so to Fainus, it would have looked like Seth was working on air or thin solid fog. Seth signaled her to wait a moment and finished the enchantments before turning to her. "Let me finish this quickly, then we can start on the decorations." He asked her to wait a little longer and turned to infuse the soul into the quizzes. At this point, it was routine for him. Soon, the quizzes had their bath in the waters of Styx. Fainus watched in rapt attention as the 2 quizzes floated in the big bubble of water Seth had summoned. They gave off a soft glow for a moment before Seth got the notifications of completion. "Ding1, you have created a legendary item. Plus 100p power of existence. Ding! Your item has changed because of a synergy of powers." The quizzes were done, and as expected, he had gotten a synergy between the power of Oculos and the soul of the hidden depth. There were 2 changes due to this synergy. The item had gained an additional effect called Unseen Kill. Unseen Killer was a combination of Oculos' property of surprise attacks and Faster Than the Eyes. Successful surprise attacks would grant a short period of actual invisibility, as well as an additional 50% damage when invisible. The skill Faster Than the Eyes has changed to Unseen Speed. Sky Dragon Quiz, left. Legendary. Sky Dragon Thigh set 1/2. Sky Dragon Armor set 1/X. Physical DEF, 2400. Mag, Def, 2400. Durability 4200. 1 negate 60% magic damage. 2 negate 40% physical damage. 3 Sky Dragon Magic. 4 Speed of Oculos. 5 Mighty Speed. 6 Passive Skill, Attack of Oculos. Sky Dragon Thigh set 2/2. Unseen Killer. Trait, Speed Killer. Passive Skill, Unseen Speed. Passive Skill, Tiner's Dash. Sky Dragon Armor set, to be updated. One of 2 quizzes forged by Master Smith, the first Master Blacksmith and Master Enchanter of Earth. Created from the legendary scale of dragon and enchanted with demonic and mysterious means, it grants great speed and power to the wearer. Chapter 1380 Purely Decorative. The blacksmith was quite satisfied with how the quizzes came out. Although the list of effects seemed a little short, many of them were compound effects with various effects under one name. The item was technically finished, now only the decorations were left. "Did you get what you wanted from Tord?" he asked Fainus, who had waited at the side. He was looking forward to the stamps she chose for her decorations. "Ah, yes, here," she said and gave him a stack of matrices made of magic steel. They had the negative imprints of the designs carved in them. All Seth needed to do was hammer the foils and fix the decorations to the item, mixing and matching them into a pattern. "Let me see," he said and took the stack, sifting through it. As she had mentioned, most of them had a floral theme. Elegant winding vines and leaves, some blossoms, nothing too fancy or overbearing, he could get behind that. "Okay, I will make a few and we can talk about how to arrange them," he said and went to the anvil to make a few examples of everything, using sheets of silver. "Is this really okay? Didn't you already finish the item? Soul and everything?" Fainus asked, unsure. Seth halted for a moment before he understood what she meant. "Oh, don't worry, since these are purely decorative, they can be added and removed at any point in time." "Well, the only drawback might be that these need separate repair, if they get damaged in a fight, since they don't share any effects of the item," the blacksmith explained. As the item was already finished, mending these decorations onto it was simply like a human wearing clothes or having a piercing. The added purely to look, without interrupting anything of the item's function. "So I will have to be careful not to get them damaged," Fainus came to her own conclusion. No. Don't give a crap about them, we can fix the in a jiffy. If you let your fighting style get influenced by flimsy decoration, I'm not adding them," the blacksmith threatened her while he was hammering the silver sheets into shape. Okay, I won't," Fainus promised, watching Seth easily create beautiful decorations with a matrix and a few strikes of the hammer. They spent the next hour arranging and attaching the ornaments made that way until Fainus was satisfied with the look of her future armor. "I think that's enough, let's end it for today," the blacksmith said, when Fainus was finally satisfied with the looks of the quizzes. He also found their looks agreeable. It had already been evening when he finished the quizzes, and now it was really getting late, and Seth wanted to meet the girls one last time before they left. "Can I come by again tomorrow, after training?" she suddenly asked. "Are you really that bored?" the blacksmith asked doubtfully, but Fainus nodded with a sigh. "I can't find any interesting shows to watch and as you know, I can't leave to go to a dungeon or on a trip to a different tree station," she admitted honestly. Right, the reason she had to stay was that Seth and the others needed her as a tailor puppet from time to time. "How about you visit Nadal tomorrow? He is currently working on the base boots for your armor boots. I'm waiting on him for those. Maybe the presence of a beautiful woman will make him work quicker? I will call you when I have something for you to try on," the blacksmith suggested. Seth intended to start on the helmet next and there was not a lot Fainus could help with her attendance until he was mostly done. Since she was bored, it was better to get some variation and see more than just forging. Fine. I will pay a visit to Nadal tomorrow and see whether I can motivate him," she joked. She left the shop first, leaving Seth alone with the finished leg armor. He put them in his inventory and got ready to leave. "Good night, guys," he said to the workshop assistants. "Good night, Seth." "Good night. Sivri, Run, and Cerberus said respectively as he vanished from the workshop and appeared back in his quarters, where he found Finn and Mina waiting to say goodbye. They had finished packing after Seth left and only waited for him before leaving. "Promise to prioritize your safety?" the blacksmith asked, after a short greeting with some tongue. "Of course, what do you take us for?" Finn said confidently. "Nothing will happen to us," Mina assured. "I mean it, if anything happens that even remotely looks like you can't handle it, run. Even if you have to leave everyone else behind, escape," Seth insisted. He liked everyone in Minazmar, but he had clear priorities. However, the girls just smiled wryly. Sure. We will leave the mission behind immediately, if anything dangerous happens," Mina acquiesced. Finn also nodded with a sigh. Seth also sighed, because he knew that his words were falling on deaf ears. He was about 90% sure the girls would not leave anyone behind. They were simply that kind. It was one of the reasons he loved them so much, but also the reason why he held some worry. Since he couldn't trust them not to throw their lives away for something as vain as saving the innocent or their friend, he made a different decision. "Before you leave, let's get outside. There is something else I want to give you," he said mysteriously, luring the girls out of Minazmar to hand them a last safety measure. The Sky Dragon helmet was a bassinet design, with an aventail made of adamantium. This meant it was one of the typical helmets one would imagine when thinking of a knight helmet with a visor. That was, if Seth had not been part of the design team. As a former member of the Chronically Online community, he had assembled a wealth of weird and curious knowledge. Rarely had it come in handy since the world fell into chaos. When thinking of a way to improve on the original design, Seth had been thinking about how to improve vision without compromising the defense of the helmet. He thought of using clear crystals or similar materials to create a see-through visor, but all of that turned to a discussion of how this solution would actually have worse visibility or a distorted view. As he was trying to come up with a material that would not be weaker than the scales and not share the same drawbacks as minerals, a peculiar fact had surfaced from the deep well. It was a video he had seen a long while ago, about how researchers had created a method to turn bones clear as glass. If he remembered correctly, it was a way to research the insides of bones. Coincidentally, he had an almost complete dragon skeleton he had kind of promised not to turn into a golem. He didn't know how it was supposed to work, but knowing it was possible was the first step to finding a solution. The question of how was actually solved before the meeting of masters was finished, by asking someone with more expertise on the subject, Nelith, at his alchemy station. The demon maestro with even greater knowledge in alchemy than the maestro residing in the Adventurer Guild's Holy Land. You just have to leach out the lipids and stabilize the tissue, the alchemy station stated as if it was obvious. It made it hard for Seth to acknowledge that he had no idea what Nelith was talking about. However, it brought them on the right track. The solution was several chemical baths to treat the bones, before using energy manipulation and Karen's obel to compact and densify the then transparent bone material, and forge out any unclear impurities left. This way, they had managed to create clear dragon bones that could be used for the visor. The only small drawback was that the bones lost their magical properties, which was not really that much of a problem, as they kept their durability and toughness. The clear visor kicked off an idea from Nico Booz, and they even went a step further. Using their combined knowledge, they found a system-native method to turn the bone glass into a one-way mirror. This way, the visor would look solid from the outside and hide the face of the wearer, while the wearer had full protection and perfect vision through the visor. Why even still use a visor instead of fixing it to the helmet as a window? For the moments when spells had to be cast or projected, which was sometimes hard in a closed helmet. Ultimately, the design of the helmet was a great mix of modern knowledge and techniques and those of the system.